Hey, and welcome to Get Ready to Launch Your Podcast Successfully. This is our live webinar, which we do monthly, and we're changing the format a little bit, which I'll tell you a bit more about throughout the webinar. But thanks for popping along. And if you've got any questions, there's obviously the live comments done by the stream there. You can drop your comments in there. We have some comments from previously submitted comments. So a little let's start again, shall we? Little introductions first while we're just letting others join the stream and just making some adjustments here. My name is Danny Brown. I'm the head of podcaster support and experience at Captivate.fm, which is the world's only growth-oriented podcast hosting, distribution, analytics, and monetization platform. We've been around for a few years now. We help the serious indie podcaster grow their podcast the right way. So that means, growing your podcast itself, growing listeners, growing your monetization options, helping you save time and use your resources better to make sure that podcasting is as effective as it can be for you as you go on your podcasting journey and grow your first podcast, second podcast, third podcast, and on and on and on. So today we'll be looking at launching the podcast successfully, and it's an overview of the 3 to 4 steps that you take to get your podcast launched and make a success of it. And that's broken down into 3 various areas. So we'll look at pre-launch, pre-publish, and then launch itself, and what you can do for each of these when you're in each step of that. And at the end of the webinar, I was about to say podcast there, at the end of the webinar, I'll have a free link for you to download our awesome crib sheet. That's a great resource for helping you get from the idea stage of a podcast to launching it and growing and getting your first 100 subscribers. So as we sort of look into the day, I'm just looking to see who's popping in here. We've got Coach Adam from San Diego. Hi, Coach Adam. We got good old Kipper McGee. He's a Captivate regular. We love Kipper. Good to see you, Kipper. Hope you're enjoying the day so far. As I mentioned, if you've got any questions about launching your podcast, we'll be covering them at the end of the webinar, which will be in about 35 minutes time or so. So drop them into the comments and I'll look to pick any of them up at the end of the webinar. If I do miss any, I'll be sure to follow them up and drop them into the Facebook group, and I'll share a link to the Facebook group at the end of the webinar too, where you can come join us. It's open to all podcasters, regardless of your podcast host. Obviously, we love you to be at Captivate, but regardless of your podcast hosting site, the Facebook group is open to all, and it's full of other podcasters like yourself looking to either launch or having just launched a podcast, or they may have got a podcast or 2 under the belt already, but are ready to launch a new podcast. And it's a really good resource for helping others like yourself get up to speed with launching your podcast. So what I'm going to do, have you seen me looking over here? A little bit of housekeeping. I've got a little second screen set up over here just for the questions that may come in, as well as just going through some of the stuff that we'll be talking about today. But I'll be sort of jumping back to this screen more than often than not, and I'll be sharing my screen soon to go through the sort of process that we use at Captivate that helps our podcasters launch their own show successfully too. And this is a process we've been using pretty much from day one when Captivate was launched, and we brought on our first podcasters to the podcasters that we have now. And it's all set up to guide you through a really clean process step guide. Let's get my words right there. To really help you understand how to plan for a successful launch, how to get everything in place for a successful launch, and then launching the podcast itself. So everything will be involved, included in the crib sheet. And as I mentioned, I'm here to answer any questions. And some of the Captivate team, they're in London this week, a podcast event over in London in the UK, where Captivate is primarily based. I'm over here in Canada, so I'm not with the team, I'm here. But we may see some of the Captivate team jump in now and again, depending if they can pull themselves away from the event. But I'm here to answer any questions you have. And as I mentioned, if you've got any other questions that I don't manage to pick up on the webinar, drop them in anyway. I will pick them up and we'll go to the Facebook group and we can talk there as well. Just looking, here's Rod Garcia. I looked at several platforms before choosing Captivate. I couldn't be happier. Couldn't be happier to hear that, Rod. Thanks very much. And we're glad to have you with us with your podcast or podcasts. And we're looking forward to you having more with you. So it's 12:05. What we'll do, I'm just going to make sure we've got everybody in here. And then I'm going to share my screen and we can go through, what the day is going to look like, or what the webinar is going to look like. You're not here all day, don't worry. But basically, we're looking at three parts. And as I mentioned, it'll be pre-launch of your podcast. So coming up with the idea, looking at the research that you need to put in place for the podcast and the goals that you want to have for it. Then you'll be looking at the pre-publish, which is slightly different from the pre-launch, even though it may sound similar. And that's where you're looking at the assets that you need, what the episodes are going to be about, how frequently you're going to be releasing episodes, what equipment you need, and what podcast host you want to go for, etc. And then from there, it takes you through to the launch itself. So obviously, you're looking at getting your show live, distributing, promotion, etc. So this is what we've gone through today in this overview. Now, after this month's webinar, the next one will be going back to step one, which is the pre-launch, and we'll breaking that down in a lot more detail. Following that, we'll be looking at pre-publish and breaking that down in more detail in 2 months' time. And then the webinar after that, coming towards the end of the summer, we'll be looking at the launch and promotion part, growing your show, getting your first 100 followers, subscribers, and promoting your show effectively the right way. So today will be the overview, which will go through the whole, the step and the process of that. Then we'll be breaking it down in future webinars. So if there's any that you want to jump on following this one, then we'll be sure to share that on the Facebook group, on our socials at Captivate, on Twitter, Facebook, etc., and also our newsletter. So look out for that, and we'll be sure to make sure you get invited over to that. So we've got Mike Gate. Captivate won me over with the distribute function, made my life much easier. Great to hear, Mike. Our goal with Captivate is to make podcasting super simple from launching the show to growing it. So great to hear that came in. Hey, Ed. Ed's got a green screen. I'm jealous, Ed. I want a green screen. I really want a green screen. I don't mind my room at the moment, but I want a green screen. So can't stick around for long, but wanted to say howdy from Florida. Hey back, Ed. And the replay will be on afterwards anyway. So anything you miss or any questions you have, the replay will be there for you to pop back and catch it there. And Present Influence. Hey, how are we doing? We're all good over here. I'm hoping you're good and well where you are today. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring up my share screen now, and we'll just bring over the actual the document that we're going to go through. So now you should be seeing the Podcast Launch Accelerator. I need to have some tea. Excuse me. Sorry. So what you should be seeing now is the Podcast Launch Accelerator. And this is the steps that we use to launch, help our podcasters launch their very first podcast, as well as successive podcasts after they've got the first ones launched. And we've been using this, as I mentioned at the start, we've been using this ever since we've had a podcasters and company and helping podcasters get off the ground and up and running. So what you'll find when you get this, and I'll be sharing a link for you to download this at the end of the webinar, and this will really help you put into place all the steps you need to launch your podcast successfully. So look out for that. That'll be at the end of the webinar. I'll make sure to put the address on screen there. But this is an introduction from our gallant leader, Mark Asquith, and he's been in the podcast space for 10, 12 years now, and he's got awesome advice over on Twitter. That's at Mr. Asquith if you want to follow him, and it's just really giving an idea how to use a crib sheet and what you'll find in the crib sheet. So what we do right up is we ask you can print this off. It's in PDF format, but this sheet here is really useful. Print it off, put it on a fridge magnet, put it on your freezer, put it on your wall in your office, on a breadboard, not a breadboard, a chalkboard or whatever it's called. But basically, look at when you want to launch your podcast, because this is really important and it will help you work back the way to get everything in place to really lock down what that launch looks like and how to actually launch the podcast. And on John Ball, hey John, you're relaunching and you're trying to get it right this time. That's why we're here. So hopefully we'll help you with that. And if you have any questions about launching that, drop it in the comments. We'll look to pick that up after the webinar. But with this sheet, as I mentioned, have just get a big Sharpie and stick this up on anywhere that's like really visible when you're going to be doing your podcasting, and put down the date that you want to launch your podcast on. And it'll just make it really straightforward for you to, as I mentioned, work back and be successful with that launch. From there, you're looking at your podcast ideas. It's really easy to launch a podcast, but to launch it successfully, you want to have an idea of what your goal is with the podcast, who it's going to attract, who you're trying to educate and entertain. So what you want to do is, as mentioned here, put down your podcast ideas. And is your podcast for a hobby? That's perfect. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of successful podcasts that started off as a hobbyist podcaster and then sort of grew from there. So is it going to be as a hobby? And if so, what's it going to be about and who's your audience for? Is it fly fishers, for example? Is it antique collectors? Is it sports, sports people? So think of what you want to put it down for as a hobby and write down the ideas for that. And then same if it's going to be for your business. Is it going to be to attract leads to a consultancy that you may run, or to attract leads to an online business, or even if you're a web designer, or if you're a freelancer, you're using the podcast to showcase your expertise, and that will attract customers to your business. So again, write it down, just check it off. What's it for? And is it for your employer? If it is for your employer, is it external, and is it to attract customers and users of your product or service? Or is it internal? Is it for employees? Is it for contractors? Is it for potential new starts and new hires? And if so, what are you going to talk about? And how is that going to attract the right kind of people to your employer? And then you want to write down the things that you love talking about, the things that your audience likes, and the things with low podcast competition. And this will really help you identify what categories to set up your podcast in, where to promote it, what social channels to join, what groups to join, what people to connect with. And again, this all goes building up towards getting everything in place, ready to launch the podcast, and make sure that once it is launched, it continues to grow in the way you're looking for it to grow. So phase one, as I mentioned at the start, we've got 3 phases that we really look at. There's pre-production, pre-publish, and then launch. So phase one, designing your podcast. And again, this really comes down to where you're looking to get the right audience and the listeners from the off. So building on from the previous page, are you creating a podcast to build a network? Is it to sell things to your audience? Is it self-sponsorship or encourage listener support and donations? And from there, you want to decide, okay, is it going to be a solo podcast? Is it just going to be you talking with the audience? Is it going to be an interview? So it could be a guest, a co-host, 2-3 guests, etc., multiple people, or it could be co-hosted. So all these little things is helping build out what your podcast is going to look like and what it's going to bring for the audience and listeners in question. And from there, you can build out what your ideal listener avatar is. Now, your listener avatar is essentially what's the perfect listener, the perfect audience member for your podcast to help it grow and continuously get listened to on each new episode release. So if you're let's say you're in video game space, are you going to concentrate on a brand? So is it going to be Sony? Is it going to be Microsoft? Is it going to be Nintendo? Is it going to be old school or new gaming? Is it going to be console gaming, PC gaming, all that kind of stuff? So what you're doing there is you're building up the details about your ideal audience and what that person and what that listener looks like. And that helps you get a demographic. Is it going to be male, female? What kind of age group is it going to be? What's their interest? And from there, again, you can start to build, okay, I know that my audience is like women gamers, 20 to 30 years old that love Sega, old school Sega. That brings a nice niche for you to go out and start, connecting with audiences and listeners on social media and Facebook and online groups for podcasting, Reddit groups, etc., subreddits. And it just really helps you start to knuckle down who the audience member is and how to attract them. And that ties into how you're going to serve your audience. Everything about podcast success a lot of podcast success is built around your audience. Obviously, without an audience, you don't have a listenership. And that's fine. That if you just want to have a podcast that lets you get ideas out there to start with, perfectly fine, not a problem with that. If you're looking to grow a podcast and make it successful in the way that you want it to be successful, that's where it comes down to understanding how you're going to serve the audience. So are you going to educate them? Are you going to entertain them? Are you going to help them understand certain things about an industry they're interested in, for example? So put down a statement for your audience that really helps them understand how you're going to help them get their own goals and meet their own stuff that they want from your podcasting. From there, the main thing you want, obviously, you need a show name. So pretty straightforward. What's your show name going to be and what's the tagline? And this again helps you when people are, say, scrolling through on podcast apps or mobile apps on their phone, etc., if you have a nice, clear, succinct show name with a really clear tagline, that helps make up their mind. Is this something I want to check out from the off? Whilst I'm looking at all these other podcasts, do I want to check out this particular this particular podcast here, and the tagline? So again, using a video game analogy, it could be old school Sega classics, really generic, but it's just an idea. But the tagline would be classic gaming from the 1980s to the 2000s with Sega. Sega gave up on the console industry in 2001, for example. So to concentrate on the classic gaming period of Sega from 1980 to 2000, that will show that potential listeners, this could be the podcast for me, because that's when I played Sega video games. And then your publishing time. One of the key things, again, for setting up a really successful podcast is consistency. And if you're going to be publishing weekly, then on weeklies on Thursdays, for example, set your stall out to be publishing weekly on Thursdays from the off. If it's going to be bi-weekly or even just monthly, and it's going to be on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern, make sure you stick to that and let your audience know that's when to expect the next episode. It really ties back to, if you watch your favorite TV show and you know it's going to be streaming on Disney Plus or Netflix or Hulu or whatever at 9 p.m. on a Thursday night, you have that set aside. You have that time set aside because you want to watch that TV episode, the latest episode. The exact same thing for podcasting. When new episodes are about to drop, listeners will be sort of geared towards expecting that episode and look out for the notification on their app. So be consistent and set your stall out for the actual publishing days and times. Hey, Jeff Radius, the PDF I'll be sharing a link at the end of the webinar, and it'll have a link where you can go download the PDF and just use it from there. And yep, thanks for that, Adam. I will be sharing a link at the end. So show notables. What are show notables? What makes your podcast stand out from other podcasts that are in your niche and in your categories? So it could be that you're only going to interview certain people in the field or the topic that you're talking about. It could be that you're only going to highlight the most experienced people about the topic. It could be that you're only going to involve companies that support green initiatives for the planet, for example. So what really helps your podcast stand out from the rest, and what can people expect with your podcast that they can't really get anywhere else? So that's what you would put in for your show notables. And this is optional, but it really helps you, again, narrow down what that looks like. Now, for your calls to action, what are your calls to action going to be and where will they be found? And your calls to action are essentially what you would like your listeners to do after they've listened to your episode. So is that going to be download a PDF? So for Jeff Radius, is that going to be download a PDF? Is it going to be subscribe to a newsletter? Is it going to be support me on Patreon, for example? So determine what your call to action is going to be and where people can find it, and then where you're going to insert that in your episode. So is it going to be a pre-roll advertisement, for example? And that could be an internal ad to a Patreon or a newsletter, or it could be for external for a sponsor that you may be working with. And pre-roll is a piece of audio that goes right before your main episode audio. Mid-roll is during the episode, so it kind of splits the audio a little bit. It inserts the audio into the episode file itself, and you'll have a gap. You'll find a little gap in your episode where you would drop the audio and the mid-roll, and this could be, again, for a sponsored message, or make sure you get, if you're enjoying this episode, for example, make sure you sign up for the free newsletter to get every single episode before anybody else. And that could be a lead magnet to make sure people subscribe to your email list, because they'll get bonus early access content. And then post-roll, that goes directly after your episode is finished. And again, that could be something like a final call to action. Hey, if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to leave a review and share with your friends on social media. Simple as that. Make your calls to action really simple so they're easy to remember and easy for you to share on your episode. From there, you need to sort of decide what your episode assets are going to be. So for your introduction, are you going to have an introduction? And if you are you going to record it yourself? Will you get it from a third-party source like Music Radio Creative? Or will you hire someone at Fiverr to create an intro for you? There's both options are fine. Both options are good, I should say, sorry, whether you record it yourself or you have a third party record it for you. They both have their strengths. If you record it yourself, it's building that relationship with your audience because they expect your voice. They get to know your voice and they get to feel comfortable hearing your voice on the podcast. With a third party one, it can be a bit more professional because they have maybe more recording studio tools and equipment and mics, etc. So it can be more professional, but sometimes you can have a little disconnect if it doesn't quite fit with the episode as soon as that starts. So just play about and see what one you feels better and feels right for your episode. Are you going to have introduction music along with the episode introduction? And if so, are you going to get that from Fiverr? Are you going to get that from third parties or Songs for Podcasters, for example? So just little decisions like that. Just taking the time beforehand to understand what you need and where you're going to get it from can really just ease the process and make your flow a lot smoother for getting your podcast ready for launch. Then just put a little script together. If you're doing an introduction, what's it going to be? And what we tend to recommend is for introducing your podcast or your individual episodes, make it succinct and make it really clear as to what the listener is going to get from the episode or from the podcast in general. So the podcast is going to be this long, this frequent. This is where you can find it. You can get it on anywhere that you get podcast episodes, any apps that you currently use at the moment, or you can go online and find it here. So make it really succinct and really clear as to what the podcast is going to offer the listener. And that's how you will attract your listeners and really make sure they want to listen to your show versus show B, C, D. And then just work out, are you going to have outro music, or is it going to be a cold outro or a call to action on how to review, how to follow, how to subscribe, etc. And for that, we give you a sort of idea of what an episode flow should look like. Because this will, again, at Captivate, we're all about making everything really flow easily for you, because the more time you can save on your production side, the more time you can spend on creation, promotion, and monetizing. And that will help you grow based on what your goals are for your podcast. So we'll give you an episode flow here. And for example, and this can work on no matter how long your episode is, if it's like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 3 hours like Joe Rogan, have segments and have them broken down as to when you want these segments, what they're going to look like, and what you want to share with the audience. And a segment could be, okay, here's my introduction. This week, you're going to be hearing from guest A about topic B. And at the end, I'll be telling you where you can find them. And then segment 2 and 3 could be sponsor messages. Segment 4 could be a real takeaway you want for the audience to get from your guest or from yourself, if it's a solo podcast. And just go through the segments and mark down exactly what you want to get across in every single episode. And once you've done that, that'll be a nice little template you can use. So when you're creating your episode show notes, for example, you've got this template already preset and you can drop that straight in. Captivate has a dynamic show notes builder, which allows you to create show notes and blocks and little short codes that you can have pre-populated. So all you're really doing is putting in that week's guest, and even that is handled for you. But this flow really helps you lock down what you want your episode to look like and how you want it to come across. And then from there, you really want to get your podcast cover art ready. That's going to help you, probably one of the biggest things along with your show name, but your podcast cover art is going to be one of the biggest things that will attract new potential listeners the first time they're scrolling through their apps or searching on Apple, Spotify, etc. for new podcasts to listen to. So you want your podcast art to be really bright, really clear, really bold, and don't clutter with too many words, because the more words you have on it, obviously, the smaller the text has to be. The smaller the text, if you can imagine, the majority of people listen to podcasts on apps. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc., all on their phone. So even if you've got like one of the big 6.5, 7-inch megaphones or whatever, the screen isn't that artwork shown on one app. So make sure your artwork is very clear and it gives a strong message as to what listeners or potential listeners will get if they click into your podcast itself. And there's certain requirements that Apple needs. So it needs to be JPEG or PNG, minimum 1400 pixels by 1400 pixels, maximum 3000 pixels by 3000, square image under 512 kilobytes in size, no bad language, etc. And you can create yourself. Canva's got a really cool feature now where they've got maybe 30, 40 preset podcast artwork templates, and you can use them as starting points and upload your own ideas and overlay them on the Canva ones and start to really build out what your artwork looks like. You can get it from Fiverr or 99 Designs we recommend as well. They're a really cool team where you sort of put in your project what you're expecting from it, what you're looking for it, and you get pitched different designs and artworks, etc. And you only pay when you choose the team that you want to work with and you're happy with the price, etc. But what we recommend is look at podcasts and the artwork that you like for these podcasts and why do you like them? Is it because they've got bright colors? Is it because they've got a picture of the host? Is it because they've got really bold writing and it makes it super clear to see what the podcast is about? So put down some artwork that you like and why you like it, and that will help you guide what your artwork will then look like. And then from there, you're finishing off with your podcast description. So this is more about what the show is. So on this podcast, you will hear about X, Y, Z, released weekly, bi-weekly. It's available on all podcast apps. You can also listen online. You'll always learn at least 1, 2, 3 things on every single episode. So think of your podcast description as a super important part where you're telling people exactly what the podcast is about. And from there, combined with your artwork and a trailer that we'll talk about soon, that will really help them decide, okay, I want to check this podcast out and I want to follow it for new episodes. And then it's just choosing your categories. And Apple has a bunch of categories and subcategories that you can really niche your podcast into to make it easier for potential listeners of that niche or of that category to find your podcast. Yeah, Rod, for sure. Rod's asking, so I'm just looking at the comments coming in. Rod's asking if you can share the website he gets his royalty-free music from. So yeah, go ahead, Rod. That'd be awesome. Thank you. So we spoke about episode show notes and a template that we use. So here's a template that we recommend. And again, we offer this kind of template on Captivate on every episode. But have an introduction to the episode. Have the guest bio if you've got a guest. If you want to include timestamps so people can listen in and then jump to relevant parts of the episode by clicking the timestamp, you can include the timestamps. Have your takeaways in bulleted format so it's easy for listeners to skim and see, oh yeah, I'm really interested in this episode because it's talking about X, Y, Z. Have your calls to action and any shareables that you'd like to include in the show notes. Now you got to be careful though, because a lot of the podcast apps don't support rich media in the show notes. So for the clickables, that's where you'd want to really make that text link clicks and call to actions in there. And then if you want to do a teaser paragraph of the next episode, so listeners know what to expect and when to expect it. So if you know that in 2 weeks' time, episode 2 will be out, this is what to expect coming up in episode 2. And then from there, we're looking at understanding podcast technology. So this really comes into like some of the terms around podcasting and some of the equipment, etc. And we've got a whole bunch of features and resources at Captivate to help you with this, but also over at podcastsuccessacademy.com. It's a free resource, got a whole bunch of tips there if you want to check that out. So that's podcastsuccessacademy.com. But this is really about understanding what equipment to use and how it benefits you based on your exact needs, budget, environment, etc. at the time. So key is a microphone. And contrary to popular belief, you don't need to jump out and buy the Shure SM7B out the gate. That's like a $400-500 microphone. Probably don't need that right away. That's a nice mic, yes, but you don't need it. So we look at recommending sort of the ATR 2100X, for example, or the Samsung Q2U, which are dynamic mics. And what we like about these ones is they're very inexpensive, between $60 to $100, depending on where you buy them. They offer both USB and XLR cables. So USB, you can plug directly into your computer and record directly into either the software built in. So let's say GarageBand on Mac or Audacity on PC if you like to download it, or even if you've got like a higher end editing software like Pro Tools, etc., or Ableton. So they're really good mics to start with, and because they're USB and XLR, if you're ready to upgrade from USB to XLR, which is like the big thick cable that comes into your microphone and that goes into a mixer and interface, they've already got that set up. So all you need to do is buy the the XLR cable and then decide what interface is going to work for your particular needs. And interfaces aren't that expensive. I use the Motu M2. I I use that because it has two inputs. So if I have an in-person interview, I can put two mics in, but I don't need more than that. And if I need more than that, I can use splitters, etc. So build it on your needs and your budget. You don't have to spend high end to get good quality sound. The Rode Pod mic's another great option. That's XLR only. And then the high OPR 40 gets a little bit more high end. Extras, headphones, cables. Headphones are super important. Sometimes I don't think headphones get enough love from recommendations, but by wearing headphones, it does take a little bit while to get used to hearing your own voice in your head and hearing others in your head while you're speaking to them. But headphones are so key for A, recording, but also B, editing. When it comes to editing, a good quality pair of headphones that you can pick up for anywhere between $40 to $100. You don't have to go crazy with your headphones either, but it really helps you listen when you're editing and picking up these little foibles and noises and that you want to maybe move out of the recording to make a better quality production for the end result. So I'd always recommend, get good headphones where you can. You can use little earpods if you want, but any headphones that are like wired and closed off are really good. Recording choice. Who are you going to use for recording? Is it going to be GarageBand on a Mac, as I mentioned? Audacity. If you're doing remote recording, are you going to use something like Squadcast or Boomcaster? Are you going to use a recording desk or a mixing desk like the Rodecaster Pro or the Zoom PodTrack P4? And again, this comes down to what you need from your own podcasting needs. The Rodecaster Pro is an amazing piece of kit, but for myself, I mentioned I don't use it. I use Motu because I don't need it. So if you don't need it, you don't have to go out and buy it right away. Look at your budget, how much you can sensibly allocate to spending on equipment and editing tools if you want to, and then start from there and build the podcast. See that you'll enjoy podcasting, and then take it from there. And then from there, your editing choice. So is it Alitu? Again, Audacity. Are you going to pay someone to actually edit for you, or are you going to have a virtual assistant helping you edit your episodes? And I don't like editing, but I've learned to enjoy it. And it's a great way to really understand podcasting, audio quality, why it's important, etc., which is why I recommend getting good headphones. And then from there, who are you going to host with? Now, obviously, as I mentioned, we're Captivate, and we'd love to see you join us over at Captivate FM. We've got an amazing range of tools and a great support team and a great community of podcasters who are, a few of them are in the comments here. So we'd love to see you there. But if it's Anchor, if it's Buzzsprout, anybody like that, find the right podcast host for you and for your needs. And from there, that's where you start to upload and get your episodes ready to launch. And then from there, it's about building your podcast and getting it ready for launch. So for building your podcast, what we recommend creating a trailer, because it's a great way. Think of the movies that you've gone to see at the movie theater when they were opening. They're open now again, so that's awesome. But a trailer helps you understand, it gets you excited for what's to come. And a trailer is also a great way to get your podcast approved on the podcast apps before you're ready to launch your show proper. It can take between 2 days to a week, maybe a little bit less, to get approved on all the main podcast apps, depending on how quickly their approval process goes. So by submitting a trailer ahead of your launch date, your show's already approved. And the only way people will find that is either by a search and just locking onto your show that way, or you share the link and tell people it's approved. So if you've got a big launch planned for your podcast proper, a trailer won't impact that anyway, but it will let you get your podcast approved. So your launch date is tied in for episodes 1 to however many you're looking to launch on launch day itself. So our trailer format, make it really quick and simple, between 90 seconds to 2 minutes. No huge intro music, but if you want to put music behind you talking, that's fine. That's what I do for my trailer. So tell listeners who you are, what the podcast is about, where you come from, why should they listen to you versus, podcaster A, B, or C that have already launched the podcast and have got listeners. The format of your episodes, what days it's going to be released, what time. Remember thinking back to that consistency. How to find your podcast. And a great way to do that is create a single landing page. At Captivate, we do that. We give you a single promo link, for example, and you can put it on whatever podcast apps you want for your podcast and drive potential listeners there, and they can choose the app they prefer and listen that way. So it's important that with your trailer, you make sure that it's telling people exactly what to expect if they become a listener and how frequently they can expect it. And again, continue to build that consistency. And then that trailer can be, as I mentioned, you can use it as a pooling, a lead for your podcast. You can share it with others. You can send it off to potential sponsors and advertising partners. So that will help you attract them in, because they'll know this is the type of show it is. This is the type of audience it's going for. Then, before you're ready to record and get your first episode up and running, make sure that you go through the checklist. So all your cables are plugged in, all your doors and windows are closed. You've not got any jackhammers going outside from roadworks. Headphones are working. You've got all your channels are set up for recording properly, etc. And do a quick 15-second test to make sure all the to make sure all the volume levels are set and you're not clipping and everything's set up on your recording software. If you've got guests, make sure they're comfortable and their levels are good and everybody's good to go. And then once you've done that, you're ready to hit record and publish your first podcast trailer. And as I mentioned, once you've got your trailer published, that's when you want to distribute it to Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever apps you want to submit it to. And our recommendation, put them to all the apps. The more apps you're on, the more chance you've got found. And it'd be a shame to miss out on potential listeners because they listen to one of the smaller podcast apps or newer podcast apps, and you haven't submitted there because you only want to be found on, say, Apple, Spotify, and Google, for example. So make sure that you get it distributed to all the podcast apps, and it makes it easier for people to choose their favorite. And then it's a matter of launching your podcast. So you've distributed it, you've told people it's now live, your trailer's live, your first few episodes are live, and now you want to just make sure that people can find it. And this is where you can utilize existing contacts and connections. So do you want to tell your family and friends, your colleagues, people that you work with, people that you're connected with online, podcasting groups? People that you're already connected with tend to be the warmest leads when it comes to promoting your podcast. They want to see you succeed, unless, they're not very good friends, but they want to see you succeed. So let them help you. Tell them, hey, do you like talk? You enjoy this topic. I've just launched a new podcast about it. It's on all the apps. I'd love for you to listen to it, tell them what you think. Maybe share with some of your audience, some of your friends, and get them to tell me, what they think and what they'd like to see in the show, and use that to build up your future episodes. Do you want to promote it to podcast newsletters? Pod News, for example, is a great one. Earbuds Collective podcast is another great one. Inside Podcasting is another great one. There's a lot of great podcast newsletters out there that are more than happy to receive pitches about new show launches and why people should listen to your show. So check out some of these newsletters, and you can find out a whole list of them online at Captivate. We've got them in the resources. If you're curious what they are, we'll drop some links in. But just reach out and ask people to check it out, and if they're interested, how can they promote it for you? And be active online. Now, don't stretch yourself too thin, because the last thing you want to do is be part of, say, 10, 12, 15, 20 groups, and then trying to be active all over the place, and then be on Twitter, be on LinkedIn for professional needs, be on Reddit, etc. Tally down. This goes back to remember when we spoke about creating your ideal audience avatar? This goes back to where they hang out and where's the best place to connect with them. And so lock down what channel and what medium you want to be on and how you're going to connect and what you're going to be connecting with. Don't make it all promotional, because people will soon switch off. Bring value. Everybody says bring value, but bring value to your listeners by adding to your episodes. So talk about some of the stories behind the topic you spoke about, where you could only speak for 5 minutes in the episode. Do a Twitter thread that goes behind the history of that topic and gives more additional details. So really think about how you're going to grow your show from there. And from that side, on launch week, what do you want to do? So you want to make sure that you've got all the all your thank yous lined up. So if you're going to say thank you to anybody that helped you get ready, so it could be an editor, could be some podcasters on Twitter, etc. Have that ready. Do a little graphic that encourages people, that makes it easy to share on social media, where they can review your show. Because as your show starts to get more reviews, it gets that nice social proof that people think, oh, that show must be good. It's got XYZ reviews, so I'm going to check it out, for example. Think of emails that you're going to send to your email list as you start to grow that and build that. And then, do you have any additional content or bonus content that you want to share, either publicly or privately for your newsletter list or for your Patreons, example. So just think of ways of what you can do to make sure that your launch week is successful. And then finishing off here, because I do see that we've got some great questions in the comments there, so I want to make sure I pick them up. And as mentioned, I'll have the link to this checklist. It's 26 pages, so you can download it and use it to go through your own podcast launch. But I just want to make sure that I don't want to miss any questions here. So we've got a whole bunch of resources in the crib sheet. So we've got a bunch over at Captivate FM on our help section, on our blog, on our YouTube channel, over on our Facebook groups, on Twitter, etc. So we've got a whole bunch there. You've also got some of the tools that we recommend. So Podcorn, Alitu, Squadcast, Fiverr, Canva, etc. And then making sure that you've got, what equipment is recommended. So we've got a link to your podcasting equipment, how to find songs. I know Rod was going to put some in there. And then Calendly and Podcast Accelerator. So that's a quick overview. I realized there was a lot taken in the space of 40 minutes or so. But as mentioned, we're going to be jumping back in future webinars. So next month, we'll be going back to the pre-launch phase, and we'll be digging deeper into just the pre-launch phase. And then from there, the pre-publish, and then launch. So we will be revisiting this and going a lot deeper in that. So don't worry, we've sort of covered a lot in this particular webinar. We will be going back to visit. And as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the questions here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to stop sharing this screen. Where are we? There we go, stop screen. All right, so I should be back now. So I'm just going to look at the questions and maybe move my, there we go. So looking at the questions, I'm just going to scroll back up now. So let's have a look at the questions. And as mentioned, if there's any questions that you have, just drop them into the comments and I'll look to pick them up, okay? So who we got here? Oh, hi, Katie. How are you doing? Katie Simpson's in there. Jati Vera. Jointly, yes, this will be available later as a recording. So I'll just drop that in. Hi, Jati. Yes, so once the webinar finishes, there will be it'll get processed and what have you, but then the replay will be there so you can watch it back at your own pace. Not a problem. Okay, so what's this question here? So Spotify has classified my show as a music channel, not podcast. Any suggestions? So have you created an account with Spotify for podcasters? If so, you've got it. That's where you would set up your categories first off. If not, I would highly recommend creating an account there, and you can claim your podcast, and that way you can actually put in your own categories and up to 3 subcategories, which gives you 9 in total, if I recall, on Spotify, and you can change it that way. If you've already submitted it and you've already got access to Spotify for podcasters, what you can do is reach out to the support team, let them know that currently it's in this category and it's put down as a music channel, sorry, not a podcast, and they can help you resolve that for you. So if you go to spotifyforpodcasters.com and then contact or help, it should be in there, but they can get that sorted for you. Kipper McGee's got a question. What you got here, Kipper? Let's have a look at this. I'm just going to bring this over here. I can see it better that way. Okay, so Kipper's got a question. If I upload episode audio first and then add my typo-corrected Descript transcription, will it change the audio? That's a great question. If the audio is already uploaded and you're adding the transcription separately, it won't change the audio. What you'd have to do, and funnily enough, Kipper, look out for an event next week. I think it's next week. Check us out on the social channels. We shared it about Descript, an awesome new feature they've got coming out that really talks to this actually. But currently, you'd have to edit it in Descript and re-import it back over to change the audio. But that being said, look at the event next week and you'll be better equipped for this. Yep, completely agree, Adam. Cables are really super important and often get overlooked. Get good ones. You do want good quality cables because obviously it's like any audio equipment. The better cables you have going into your different parts of equipment, etc., the higher quality the connection will be and bring that better audio out for you. Rod's got a question. Sure, I've been subscribed to all of them. Is there an easy way to be sure that my podcast is actually showing up on all the platforms? Yes, there is. So what we recommend is, I spoke about a newsletter earlier, like Pod News industry newsletter. So go to podnews.net and at the top right hand side, you'll see a little search bar. Type your show name into that search bar and you'll get a bunch of results, and click on your results. Scroll down a little bit and you'll see the apps that your podcast is currently available on. Make sure that you click the all link or available on all links or whatever it says. I think it says all links or all apps, because what Pod News does is it'll only show the apps that are compatible with your iOS or your operating system. So I'm on Mac, for example. So when I click through and search for my show, it will only show the apps that are compatible with Mac software. So if you want to see where they're all listed, click that little all links option, and that will show you where your podcast currently is. Coach Adam, what we got here, Adam? Do you think including YouTube as part of your launch strategy is important, given according to Edison research, it's the most popular destination people say they find new podcasts? So I saw that come out today, actually. Was it today, yesterday? That there was another report that mentioned that YouTube is now one of the most popular destinations for podcast listening, which makes sense because YouTube's been around quite a while, as is podcasting, but a lot of people have YouTube on in the background. They don't always watch the videos, they have it on in the background. So it's definitely worthwhile considering it as part of your strategy. But how are you going to do it? Are you going to just upload audio that you've recorded from your podcast and then put a still image in with maybe some words popping up now and again? Or are you going to make it more active and visual, where you maybe recording something like this, for example, and this could be uploaded to YouTube and tie it back into a podcast episode? So think about how you're going to approach it. There's a lot of great resources out there on podcasting on YouTube, and Captivate's got a guide as well, actually. I'll look to get a link for that. But Captivate's got a guide on optimizing your podcast for YouTube. But it's definitely worth considering. If it's not going to be part of your initial launch, are you going to include it down the line? Okay, we got one from NG Hess. Hi, NG. I record my podcast on Zoom and edit on Descript. Can you clarify how recording device would bring additional value? Is it mostly sound quality? So Zoom's got a nice feature. I'm not sure if it's on the free version or if it's only on premium. But you can switch the audio quality over to local recording or separate track recording. Can't call quite which one it is. And that makes it a bit more quality or higher quality than just a standard, say, web recording, which can depending on your internet connection, it can sometimes be good, sometimes be a bit iffy. Whereas local recording is essentially like recording into your hardware, your computer, your interface, etc., or your recording software. So with Zoom, you can make the quality higher. It just depends on what plan you're on, I believe. But with Descript, so Descript has got a great feature called Studio Sound, and it's got a whole bunch of other editing features as well to help you with your sound. So even if the Zoom quality wasn't quite up there, NG, the Studio Sound option, when you run your file through Studio Sound, that listens to the audio and automatically repairs where it feels needs repairing. So is there echo in your environment? Is there clipping where you're speaking too loud so that it's starting to go really distorted? Clipping is a bit harder to fix, but generally Studio Sound's awesome when it comes to making your audio sound really good. So what I would recommend is look for the feature on Zoom where you can separate the track, and then see what you can do in Descript with running it through Studio Sound. A recording device would be awesome, because anytime you can add more equipment to really separate and focus on the audio, that's always going to help and benefit you as a podcaster. But as I mentioned, you don't have to do that right away. Work to your budget, what feels right and safe for you to do from a budget point of view, and then just build from there as you do more podcasting, as you grow more experience. Okay, and I think that's the questions that I've got on the comments. I got a couple that we heard earlier prior to the webinar going live, so I'll go through them. And as I mentioned, we've got about another 10 minutes or so. So if you do have a question, drop it in, and I'll get the links down below for the crib sheet so you can get that. So question that came in from Angela Harkness: can someone please help me with podcast numbering? I know the advice leans more toward not adding episode numbers, but personally I quite like it when I listen to podcasts to see where I am. And what Angela's on about here is, should the episode numbers be in the episode title, or should it just be the episode title? My question is, I've seen a particular podcast I listen to, their episodes are numbered on Spotify, very simply 1 title, 2 title, but not on Apple. So This comes down to personal preference. We recommend that you don't need to put the episode titles in, only for this reason. The episode numbers. You definitely do need the episode title, so ignore that piece of advice. Episode numbers, we recommend that you don't need to do that for this reason, where it can cause formatting issues and display issues across different apps. At Captivate and other podcast hosts, you should have the option on these hosts, as you do at Captivate, where you can put in what episode number it is and what season number it is. And then that just leaves the title area just for the title, the summary area just for the summary, and the show notes area just for the show notes. And that way, by using that system, it doesn't matter if you have oldest episode first, newest episode first, that kind of stuff. The number will always be associated to that episode. When you put the numbers into your episode title, if you ever change podcast hosts or you ever change how you want to display your podcast episodes, and they've all got numbers in them, and you've got 50, 100, 200 episodes, and for whatever reason these episode numbers can't be used anymore, that's a lot of manual editing to go through individual episodes just to take the numbers out. So I would always recommend leave the numbers out, utilize the feature on your podcast host that allows you to allocate the episode numbers, and then just leave the episode title space just for the title. Danielle Kamar, has anyone used Descript as a beginner podcaster? Any opinions on Descript versus Alitu? So yeah, I mean, a lot of podcasters, we had a question there about Descript. A lot of podcasters, I was using Descript. I don't use it anymore because I use a different recording flow, but it's a great piece of software. And a lot of beginner podcasters use Descript. And it's a little bit different from Alitu. I look at the share similarities, so they're both recording tools. They both allow you to edit and put together an episode. I would suggest Alitu has got less features maybe than Descript. It has a lot more, from a transcript point of view, for example. It allows you to do a bunch of more features on post-production and audio quality cleanup, etc. So similar but different. And with Descript, it really comes down to your budget and how many of the features you'll use in Descript, for example, than you would use in Alitu or any other editors or recorders. And if you're not going to use the majority of the features in Descript, it may be better that you're better suited to Alitu. Over at Captivate, we have a really good guide on Alitu as well as Descript. You can go to the blog, like captivate.fm/blog, and then just type in the search bar Alitu Descript, and you'll see your guides pop up there. And that gives you a really good breakdown of, the two software. So they are both used, and again, it really comes down to your own goals there, I think. I'll be honest, Rod, I haven't used Reaper. I sat down because I watched Booth Junkie's video course on Reaper, and it looks awesome. It looks a great editing software, but I haven't sat down with it because I've been playing with different editors, and I've finally like landed on Hindenburg, and I'm using that with a couple of plugins to sort of do my sound and post-production. So I'm really happy with that at the moment, but I know Reaper gets awesome reviews. Anytime someone mentions Reaper, it's always positively and with a lot of love. So it sounds like it's a great editor. I just haven't really had a chance to sit down and play with it properly, but it looks a great editor. So that's all the questions, it looks like it, which is awesome. That was a great question. And as I mentioned, if there's any more, drop them in. If we don't get to cover them in this webinar, we'll be wrapping up soon anyway. I will pick them up and share them over in the Facebook group. That's just look for podcasting tips over on Facebook. So it's facebook.com/podcasting tips, and that should be the Captivate group. Come over, join us there. This is like our public group that's for everyone on every podcast host, and we'll make sure that any questions you have get answered there. So as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, what I want to make sure is that we've got the link to the PDF, like the crib sheet that I went through in the webinar. So at the bottom of the screen now, you'll see that sort of ticking along. Am I doing the right direction? There we go, ticking that way. So you'll see it ticking along. You can go to captivate.fm/crib sheet. It's a completely free crib sheet that we walked through there. And as I mentioned, it's about 26 pages, I think. And it goes through all the steps for getting ready for launching your webinar. This is a webinar. For launching your podcast, from idea stage to pre-planning, pre-production, getting all the tools you need, all the equipment, or how you're going to grow it, how you're going to plan it out for launch, etc. It's all in the crib sheet and completely free. And as I mentioned, it's one that we recommend and we give to our podcasters. I've used it myself to launch some of my podcasts, and it works. It's a really good resource. So go to captivate.fm/cribsheet, download it for yourself. And as mentioned, we're over at captivate.fm. We'd love to see you if you're looking for either a new host, ready to start your podcast, potentially moving from another host. We'd love to see you there. Just come check us out and see what tools we've got there. As I mentioned, we will be back next month, around about the same time. Well, same time, 12 noon Eastern, but in about 4 weeks' time. And we'll be going back to phase 1, which is the pre-launch. And that will be really digging into the pre-launch section. So if you're going through the crib sheet and there's questions pop up about that stage, let us know. Join us on that webinar, and we'll be happy to go through that and really walk you through the pre-launch stage. Oh, Kipper, got a last question. Yeah, I'll do it for you, Kipper. Could you explain again why certain pod outlets do not publish show note links and how the Captivate short link feature works? So all the podcast outlets or apps, I'm guessing, they will publish your show notes, but there's a 4,000 character limit, like a cap on show notes. And some podcast apps have that even less, depending on the podcast app and the developers behind it. If it's a smaller app, it may be that they have less than, say, the 4,000 character show notes limit. So that's where you'll start to see them cropping off. Depending on the podcast app themselves, some are really good at formatting hyperlinked show notes and hyperlinks, where you'll highlight the word, add the link that way, so the word is there and the word is linked, as opposed to the text link that says something like domain.com/link, whatever that is. That really comes down to the apps themselves. It's like something that we wish, it'd be nice to see all apps maybe have a standard where no matter what podcast host you use and what podcast app your episode is on and what show note it is, they would just work. And it may be that as bigger players, become more involved, so Spotify, Amazon Music, etc., become more involved in podcasting, they'll support more stylized, formatted show notes. For Captivate short link, the short link, now, Kipper, is the short link what short link is this? Is this the single promo link that you can share with your listeners so they can choose their app, or something different? I'll wait for Kipper coming there. If it's a short link, if it's a single promo link, that's just like a single promo link that we generate based on your podcast name and URL of your Captivate site. And that allows you to send listeners to the short link or the single promo link and choose what app they prefer to listen on, and just click through that, and that will allow them to jump through to that app and then follow on that particular app. If it's the short link, Captivate short link, if it's a different thing that you're on about there, Kipper, let me know and I can go through that with you. But that's basically why different apps have different ways. All right, so there's a short code maybe, and our dynamic show notes builder, and that can be linked. So depending on what you're adding, if it's a short code, if it's a template or a block, that can be added either as an HTML link code, HTML code that you would use to link your short code, or it can be used by the visual editor where you can hyperlink the link right away. But just to make sure that I've got the right thing, Kipper, if you want to hop on over to our chat, our support chat, I'll be on there after lunch and I can go through that with you to make sure I give you the exact information that you're after there, mate. Okay. Alrighty, so I think we're good to go. Thanks everyone for coming along this afternoon. I hope this has helped. As I mentioned at the bottom, there's the link to the free crib sheet. It's the 26-page PDF that will help you go through from your idea through to pre-planning, pre-launch, and then launching. And then from there, obviously, that's where you start marketing and promoting and all that fun stuff and attracting advertisers and sponsors. And again, we'd love to see you over at captivate.fm. We can help. We've got a whole bunch of marketing tools over there to really help you meet your goals with your podcast, regardless of that's growing your audience, growing sponsors, growing downloads, or just growing your understanding of podcasting and audio, etc. So thanks again for coming along today. We'll see you next month. We'll be jumping into the pre-launch phase of podcasting and really going into a deep dive on that. So until next time, take care, stay safe, and happy podcasting.